Emily Hart hadn't planned on going to her high school reunion. The invitation had sat in her inbox for weeks, ignored like most of the other reminders of her small-town past. Now 32, living in Boston, and recently out of a 5-year relationship that ended more with a sigh than a scream. She found herself missing something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the relationship she missed, it was feeling known, feeling seen. So on a quiet Friday evening, a little wine in her glass and her heart leaning toward nostalgia, she clicked it going. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the hope of seeing someone who once made her heart feel safe. That someone was Jacob Carter. Back in high school, they'd been the kind of friends who did everything together, late-night drives, library study sessions that turned into deep talks about dreams and fears, long walks by the lake, sometimes without saying a word. People used to whisper about them like they were already a couple, but nothing ever officially happened. They were just friends, the kind of friendship that always sat too close to the edge of something more. But then life swept them in different directions. Emily left Vermont for college and never really came back, building a life in the city. Jacob stayed behind, helping his father run the family hardware store after a sudden stroke made things difficult. Over time, the texts slowed, the calls stopped, and the connection faded, at least on the surface. The reunion was held at the local community center, dressed up with string lights and folded name tags. Emily felt a bit like an outsider. People had stayed, grown roots, started families. She smiled through conversations, answered the same questions about work and city life, but part of her felt like she didn't belong here anymore. And then, like something out of a dream, Jacob walked in. He looked different. Older, broader in the shoulders, his face more carved by time. But those deep brown eyes hadn't changed. They still had that same gentle steadiness, like he could see through all the noise of life and look straight at you. When he spotted her, his smile spread slow and easy. "Emily Hart," he said, walking up with a quiet confidence. "Didn't think I'd see you here." They hugged, awkward at first, but familiar. It felt like picking up a book you hadn't read in years, only to remember every line. What was supposed to be a 5-minute catch-up turned into hours. They found a quiet table in the back and just talked about where life had taken them, about who they became, about what they lost and what they never found. There was a warmth between them, something more mature now, more grounded, but still laced with that old, undeniable spark. Emily noticed the way Jacob leaned in when she laughed, how his voice softened when he asked about her life. He noticed the way her eyes lingered on him, how her guard seemed to drop the longer they talked. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It was familiarity mixed with something hungrier, older. The kind of slow burn that doesn't beg for attention but quietly demands its. The night grew later and the crowd thinned. Neither of them made a move to leave. The air between them changed, charged but unspoken. No one said the words, but both were thinking the same thing. Why didn't this ever happen before? Something had always been in the way. Time. Fear. Bad timing. But now, here they were, sitting inches apart, the years melting quietly into the space between them, and they were just talking. But something had shifted. They both felt it. Even if they didn't say it yet. The night air was cold as Jacob walked Emily to her car, but she barely noticed. Her coat was zipped up, her hands tucked deep into her pockets, but the warmth between them had nothing to do with the weather. Snow had started to fall, soft and silent, layering the streets of their small Vermont town with a light dusting that made everything feel still, like the world had paused for just this moment. They didn't speak right away. After all that catching up inside, this silence felt different, comfortable, charged, and deeply personal. Emily's breath came out in soft clouds, and beside her, Jacob's did the same. Still, neither made a move to leave. You ever think about it? Emily finally asked, her voice low, her eyes fixed on the glowing street lamp ahead. What we were back then, or what we could have been. Jacob's steps slowed, then stopped. He turned to face her, snow dusting his dark jacket, his eyes steady and familiar.
Yeah,
He said, not hesitating. More than I probably should. That admission hit her somewhere deep. It was strange how they'd never talked about this before, not even once. Not when they were teenagers sneaking out to sit by the lake. Not in the letters they wrote their first year apart. Not in the scattered texts over the years that always felt a little too short. But it was always there, just under the surface, an ache, a question, a quiet wondering. She looked at him then, really looked. You were always the safe place, she said. I think I was afraid of ruining that. Jacob's expression softened. Me too. You were the only thing that felt real when everything else was falling apart. Emily swallowed, her heart thudding louder than the snow beneath her boots. Are you still with someone? She asked. She hadn't meant to ask it. The words slipped out like they'd been waiting too long. He shook his head. It ended a few months ago. It just stopped working. We wanted different things. He hesitated, then added, and you? Emily hesitated too. He moved out last spring. We kept pretending we were okay. But I think we both knew we weren't in love anymore. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by snow and silence and the sharp, quiet reality that they were both unattached now. For the first time in years, something unspoken hovered between them. Not urgency, but possibility. That space where something real could finally grow if either of them reached for it. Jacob smiled, just a little, tilting his head. You know what I remember most about us? What? You always made me feel like I could say anything. Like I didn't have to be anyone else. Emily's throat tightened. That's because you never pretended to be anyone else. She took a step closer, and the distance between them disappeared. It wasn't romantic in the usual sense. There were no fireworks, no grand declarations. Just two people, older now, maybe a little worn down by life, standing in the cold. Finally saying things they should have said years ago. There was something so painfully beautiful about it. Like finding an old letter you wrote but never sent. Something that still mattered. Neither of them kissed. Not yet. But the pull was there, undeniable. A quiet gravity drawing them closer with every breath. Jacob looked down at her hand, tucked in her coat pocket. Emily, he said quietly, maybe this isn't just about the past. And in that moment, with snow catching in her hair and her heart slowly cracking open, she wondered if maybe this, right now, was the beginning of something they were finally ready for, something real. Something that had waited long enough. The days that followed felt like slipping into a familiar dream for Emily and Jacob, one they had both quietly longed for but never dared to believe would return. They started spending time together again, under the soft excuse of just catching up. Coffee on a Sunday morning turned into long drives through snowy backroads, playlists filled with old songs they used to love, and conversations that ran deeper than either of them expected. It was all so natural, laughing over childhood memories. Sitting in his truck sharing stories from the lives they'd built apart. But beneath the comfort was something else, something neither of them could ignore anymore, tension, curiosity, and that slow-burning desire that had lived in the silence between them for years. And though they were both careful not to label what was happening, every glance lasted a second too long, every touch lingered like it meant more than it should have. One evening, just after sunset, they drove up to the lake, the same place where they used to sit as teenagers, watching the water shimmer under the moonlight. The surface was frozen now, quiet and still, reflecting the deep indigo sky. Jacob parked the truck near the edge of the trees, and they stayed inside, engine off, surrounded by the kind of silence that asks questions. Emily hugged her knees to her chest, looking out through the frosted window. "It's weird, isn't it?" she said softly. "Being back here. It feels the same, but we're not the same." Jacob looked over at her, his voice low. "We're older. A little more beat up, maybe. But I don't think that's a bad thing." She turned toward him, heart beating fast but steady. "Do you ever wonder why we never crossed that line before?" He nodded slowly. "All the time." He paused. Then added, "I think I was afraid I'd lose you. That if we tried and it didn't work, we'd ruin what we had." Emily exhaled, her breath fogging the glass. "And now?" He didn't look away. "Now? I think I'd regret not trying more." The words settled between them like a quiet dare. And in that space, something shifted. Slowly, gently, Jacob reached for her hand. His touch was warm, careful. She didn't pull away. The truck felt impossibly still. Then, without a word, he leaned in. The kiss wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was slow, full of years they'd spent wondering, aching, hoping. It held every missed chance, every quiet longing, every almost that had ever passed between them. And in that moment, time folded. They weren't two adults with messy histories and complicated futures. They were just Jacob and Emily, the boy who always stayed, and the girl who had left but never truly let go. When the kiss ended, neither spoke right away. Emily kept her eyes closed, as if trying to hold on to the feeling just a second longer. When she opened them, Jacob was looking at her with the same softness he always had, but now, something else lived in his gaze. Something deeper. Something that asked, "What now?" but reality was never far behind. Her phone buzzed against the dashboard, her ex again, trying to reach out. She had a job offer sitting in her email, one that would pull her back to Boston in less than 2 weeks. Life hadn't paused for them, even if this moment had. Still, nothing had felt more real in a long time. She didn't have the answers. Neither did he, but they both knew something had changed. They were no longer just friends with a complicated history, they were something else now. And that one unexpected kiss had rewritten everything. The morning after the kiss felt both quiet and electric. Emily sat on the front porch of Jacob's cabin, wrapped in one of his old flannel blankets, her hands cupped around a steaming mug of coffee. The world around them was covered in a soft layer of snow, still untouched and peaceful, like even nature was holding its breath. Jacob came out a few minutes later with 2 plates of toast and eggs, setting one beside her before sitting down without a word. They didn't speak right away, not because there was nothing to say, but because both of them were still feeling the weight of everything that had passed between them the night before. The kiss had been simple, yes, but it had opened a door neither of them could close again. And now, sitting beside him under the pale morning light, Emily felt like she was caught between 2 lives, the one she had built back in Boston, and the one she might still have here with the one person who had always felt like home. Jacob finally broke the silence. "You okay?" he asked gently, turning toward her. She nodded slowly, then looked at him. "I think so. I'm just thinking about us. About everything," she said honestly. "About what this could be. And if we're too late." He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I don't believe in perfect timing," he said. I think the right things come when we're ready, not when the calendar says so. Emily smiled faintly, but her heart was still tangled. I want this, she said, her voice quiet but certain. But I don't want to be reckless. I've spent the last few years trying to rebuild myself, trying to be smart about love. I'm tired of crashing into things without thinking. Jacob nodded, his eyes steady. Then we won't crash. We'll walk into it. Slow. Real. No pressure. She looked away, then back at him. There's a job offer in my inbox. It's a great opportunity. Big raise. Big move. He exhaled. And she could tell he'd been expecting that. Boston?
Yeah.
I'd have to leave in a couple weeks. The pause that followed was long and heavy. But he didn't try to guilt her. He didn't beg. Instead, he said something she didn't expect, then let's use the time we have. And see where it leads. No promises. No pressure. Just truth. It wasn't the sweeping, dramatic answer she thought she wanted, but it was the right one. It was grown up. Grounded. Loving, in a quiet way that felt more real than any grand romantic gesture. Emily reached for his hand then, fingers curling into his. I don't want to lose this. You won't, he said softly. No matter what happens, you won't. They sat there for a long time, just breathing together. Sharing the kind of silence that only exists between two people who understand each other. And though the future still felt uncertain, though jobs, cities, and choices waited for them, there was peace in the present, because the truth was, they hadn't missed their moment, they had just taken the long road to get here, and now, whatever happened next, it wouldn't be because they were afraid. It would be because they finally had the courage to choose love, not out of impulse, but out of something deeper, something earned. Something lasting. Something that had always lived quietly between them, waiting to be found again, and this time, they wouldn't let it slip away.